The 1960s gave us the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Beach Boys, names that feel as timeless as the songs themselves. But here's the thing, for every legendary act, there were dozens of bands that burned bright, fast, and faded just as quickly. This video is a love letter to those forgotten gems. Join us as we discuss 15 bands from the 1960s you may have almost forgotten about. Let us know in the comments below which one of these was your favorite. Number 1. Paul Revere and the Raiders. It's almost criminal how overlooked Paul Revere and the Raiders are today. If showmanship were an Olympic sport, Paul Revere and the Raiders would have swept the gold. Known for their revolutionary war-themed outfits and energetic stage antics, this Portland, Oregon band brought history class to the garage rock scene. But don't let the costumes fool you, they had serious musical chops. Their 1966 hit, Kicks, was a proto-psychedelic anthem about resisting the temptations of drugs, written by the legendary songwriting duo Man and Weil. Other hits like Hungry and Good Thing showed off their skill for gritty rock riffs mixed with catchy pop hooks. So why didn't they last? Changing taste and an image that was increasingly seen as campy left them stranded in the 1970s. Still, they'll always be remembered as the band that brought colonial swag to rock and roll. And speaking of bands with a talent for blending rock with pop, next up we'll be looking at a band that made every day feel like summer. Number 2. The Grassroots. The Grassroots were the perfect description of a 60s pop rock band. They were famous for blending folk and rock into irresistible radio gold. With hits like Let's Live for Today and Midnight Confessions, they had a talent for pairing heartfelt lyrics with lush instrumentation. The group had an unusual start. It was essentially a studio project created by producers P.F. Sloan and Steve Barry, but it quickly grew into a real touring act. By the late 60s, it was one of America's most successful singles bands. However, as the 70s started and rock slowly took over the music scene, its polished pop sound began to feel out of place. Despite everything, the Grassroots left behind a treasure trove of good hits that still sound fresh today. But don't worry, this isn't the end of the feel-good vibe. Let's take a magical detour to a band that believed in the power of, well, magic.
Do you believe in magic in a young girl's heart?
The Lovin' Spoonful. If there was ever a band that could bottle joy and sell it, it was the Lovin' Spoonful. Formed in New York City in 1965, they were pioneers of folk rock before it had a name. Their breakout hit, Do You Believe in Magic, was a pure shot of sunshine, blending jangly guitars with John Sebastian's warm vocals. The Spoonful followed it up with an impressive run of hits, including Daydream and The Playful Summer in the City, which showcased their ability to capture both breezy optimism and tough urban life. But the good times didn't last. Legal troubles, internal tensions, and the departure of key members saw the band die off by the end of the 1960s. While they're almost forgotten, there's no denying the fact that for a few golden years, the Lovin' Spoonful made believing in magic feel easy.
Imagine me and you, I do. I think.
Number 4. The Turtles. There's no forgetting Happy Together. Its sunny harmonies and swelling orchestration made it one of the most unforgettable pop hits of the 1960s. The Turtles, with their quirky charm and cheerful vibes, were the ultimate feel-good band. Hailing from Los Angeles, they rode the wave of the folk rock craze before gradually evolving to a cleaner pop sound. Their hits like Eleanor and You Showed Me proved that they weren't just a one-hit wonder. But while the Turtles were masters of catchy tunes, their offbeat humor and refusal to take themselves too seriously sometimes worked against them. They struggled to find their footing in an era that demanded constant reinvention. By the early 70s, they disbanded, with members Howard Kalin and Mark Volman reinventing themselves as comedic rock duo Flo and Eddie. The Turtles may have faded, but they left a catalog of perfect sing-alongs. And speaking of perfect, here comes a band whose name was as sweet as their psychedelic vibe.
Innocence, crippling mankind, dead kings, many things.
Number 5. Strawberry Alarm Clock. Incense and Peppermints. Even if the name doesn't immediately ring a bell, the swirling organ, trippy harmonies, and sunshiny vibe probably do. Strawberry Alarm Clock was the perfect description of a flower power band. They burst onto the scene in 1967 with their one major hit. Their music was a marvelous combination of guitars, dreamy vocals, and groovy melodies that fit perfectly into the summer of love. But like many bands associated with the era's psychedelia, they struggled to adapt once the scene faded. Creative clashes and lineup changes didn't help, and they quickly found themselves a footnote in the decade's history. Still, for one glorious moment, they were the poster children of peace, love, and tie-dye. Next up is a band with a strange name and an even stranger story.
Remember Sunday morning,
Number 6. Spanky and Our Gang. While many bands were trying to capture the rebellious spirit of the 60s, Spanky and Our Gang leaned into sweet, wistful melodies. With their lush harmonies and soft pop sound, they scored hits like Sunday Will Never Be the Same and Lazy Day. Led by Elaine Spanky McFarlane, the group exuded a breezy optimism that felt timeless. Unfortunately, their career was tragically cut short when band member Malcolm Hale died in 1968, leading to their eventual disbandment. By then, folk pop was also falling out of favor as harder-edged rock dominated the charts. Though their time in the spotlight was brief, their songs remain a perfect time capsule of simpler, cheerful days. Number 7. The Electric Prunes. The Electric Prunes didn't just make music, they created sonic experiments. Their breakout track, I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night, was a fuzzy, trippy anthem that felt like a dream that you weren't quite ready to wake up from. Formed in Los Angeles, the band became known for their pioneering use of effects pedals and studio techniques. But while their early hits showed promise, their label began pushing them in increasingly bizarre directions, including forcing them to record a religious-themed concept album, Mass in F minor, that alienated fans. Frequent lineup changes added to the chaos, and the band fizzled out by the early 70s. However, their influence on the growing psych rock movement was undeniable. Number 8. The Standells. If you've ever been to a Red Sox game, you've probably heard Dirty Water, the 1966 garage rock anthem that put the Standells on the map. This Boston-based band with its raw sound was the perfect antidote to the more polished pop acts of the day. Led by singer and keyboardist Larry Tamblyn, the Standells leaned into a proto-punk aesthetic, with tracks like Sometimes Good Guys Don't Wear White and Why Pick on Me. Their music wasn't flashy, it was grungy, defiant, and unapologetically cool. Despite their early success, the band struggled to break out beyond regional fame. As the garage rock scene evolved into something heavier, the Standells faded into obscurity. Still, Dirty Water remains popular today as a garage rock classic, forever tied to their Boston roots. Speaking of roots, next up is a band that gave British blues a Chicago twist. Number 9. The Shadows of Night. You've probably heard Gloria, a raw bluesy anthem that's a popular part of 1960s rock. While the song was originally written and recorded by the Irish band Them, The Shadows of Night turned it into a massive American hit. The Chicago band took the British invasion blues sound and gave it a raw Midwestern edge. Formed in 1964, The Shadows of Night made waves with their punchy, rebellious take on rock and roll. Their version of Gloria became a massive hit in the US, and follow-ups like Oh Yeah showed they weren't afraid to get loud and brash. Unfortunately, as the music world grew more experimental, their straightforward garage rock started to feel dated. By the late 60s, the band had fallen apart, but their influence on the garage and punk scenes remained undeniable. Number 10. Blues Magoos. If you cranked up a garage band's amps, threw in some psychedelia, and added a healthy dose of blues swagger, you'd get the Blues Magoos. Hailing from the Bronx, this band burst onto the scene with their 1966 hit, We Ain't Got Nothin' Yet, a groovy, organ-heavy track that remains a garage rock classic. With their flashy electric suits, Yes, they actually lit up on stage, and high-energy performances. The Blues Magoos had the makings of rock stars. But their attempts to lean further into psychedelia diluted their sound, and they couldn't sustain the momentum. By the early 70s, they had faded, leaving behind a brief but electric legacy. Now let's move on to a band that had the Beatles stamp of approval but struggled to keep their ball bouncing.
I should have known you bid me farewell. There's a lesson to be learned from this.
Number 11. The Circle. Have you ever heard of Red Rubber Ball? If you have, you've met The Circle. Managed by none other than Brian Epstein, the same man behind the Beatles. This American band had an easygoing bubblegum pop sound that made them stand out in 1966. Red Rubber Ball became a top 10 hit, followed by the equally catchy Turn Down Day. Their smooth harmonies and airy melodies felt perfectly made for summer afternoons, but as music trends shifted toward more complex sounds, The Circle couldn't keep up. They disbanded in 1968, leaving behind a handful of tunes that still feel like a sunny day in song form. They may not have lasted, but their harmonies paved the way for the next group, whose voices created some of the sweetest pop hits of the decade. Number 12. The Association. In the mid-60s, the Association were kings of harmonized pop. Their orchestral arrangements and heartfelt lyrics produced a string of hits, including Windy, Cherish, and Never My Love. These tracks became wedding staples and easy listening classics. Formed in Los Angeles, they had the vocal chops and songwriting skills to dominate the charts. But as rock culture shifted toward rebellion, their sound felt increasingly out of step. By the early 70s, their popularity had waned, though their harmonies remained iconic. Number 13. Tommy James and the Shondells. If the 60s had a jukebox, it would have been stacked with Tommy James and the Shondells hits, from the infectious bubblegum pop of Mony Mony to the dreamy psych rock of Crimson and Clover. This Michigan band seemed to have a song for every mood. They started as a humble garage band, but a 1966 re-release of Hanky Panky shot them to fame. The Shondells quickly became hitmakers, blending catchy hooks with enough experimentation to keep things interesting. But by the early 70s, tensions within the band and Tommy James's decisions to go solo brought their story to a close. Their songs remain eternal party anthems, proving that good hooks never go out of style. When it comes to evolution, our next band tried to bridge the gap between soul, rock, and groove, but they sadly couldn't keep their momentum. Number 14. The Rascals. The Young Rascals. If good lovin' for the Rascals doesn't get you moving, something must be wrong somewhere. The Rascals started as the Young Rascals, blending blue-eyed soul with rock and roll energy. They followed their debut hit with classics like Groovin' and People Gotta Be Free, which showcased their knack for socially conscious lyrics paired with irresistible melodies. But the late 1960s were turbulent, and internal conflicts, coupled with shifting musical tastes, took their toll. By the early 70s, the Rascals had disbanded, leaving a legacy of soulful, feel-good hits. We'll wrap up this timeless script with a band from Memphis that charmed audiences with pure soul music.
Lonely days are gone, I'm a-going home. My baby used to root me a little.
Number 15. The Box Tops. When 16-year-old Alex Chilton stepped up to the mic to record The Letter, no one could have predicted it would become a blue-eyed soul classic. Backed by a tight, soulful band, Chilton's gravelly voice gave the song maturity and weight far beyond his years. The Box Tops followed it up with hits like Cry Like a Baby and Soul Deep, cementing their status as one of Memphis's most loved bands. Their sound was a smooth mix of rock and soul. However, creative differences and Chilton's growing desire to move toward more experimental music led to their breakup in 1970. Chilton would later achieve national fame with Big Star, but the Box Tops remain a symbol of 60s soul pop at its best. Which of these bands do you wish were still around today? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more awesome videos. See you next time.